This conference will now be recorded.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the November 17th workshop meeting of the Board of Commissioners to discuss our budget. This evening, we're going to start things off by just a roll call to see which commissioners are here this evening. Renee, if you would.
Commissioner Walk.
Here.
Commissioner Mobilio.
Here.
Commissioner Kelly.
Here.
Commissioner Seton.
Here.
And Commissioner Morgan.
Here. Great. Thank you, everybody. And we'll get things started this evening. If everybody would please rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance with me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, everybody. I'd also like to note that all public sessions of the South Whitehall Township Board of Commissioners are electronically recorded, filed, and posted on board docs for the public's access. With that being said, we are going to move right into our workshop presentation this evening. I'm going to hand it over to Renee first. We'll be handing it then over to Scott for our financial reviews. Renee?
Thank you. Tonight, we're going to start with the fire fund tonight, which Scott will be going over into. Fire fund is a fund that stays relatively the same as last year, but after we go over the fire fund, we have a few questions outstanding from the general fund from last week in terms of open space and contributions. And then we'll just show you the final summary pages for water and sewer, because we did have to do a few adjustments to them for the reimbursements through the general fund for their portion of some of the expenses. So with that being said, we'll move right into the fire fund. And tomorrow night is our first reading of the budget. And that is traditionally what happens is the summary sheet of the budgets, which are revenues over expenses, unappropriated reserves. That is the portion of the budget that is read at the first reading of the budget and the second reading of the budget. And then after tomorrow night, a public inspection copy becomes available of the budgets. And so that becomes available, and that is advertised as the budget. I did want to, when we get to water fund, Diane, we can answer your questions, the question that you sent in earlier today. But the second part of your question on requisitions, blanket purchase orders. Blanket purchase orders are created after the budget has been approved and passed. You will see that blanket purchase orders will be on the board agenda for motion in January. Those blanket purchase orders are based off of the approved expenses. And that's simply just vendors that we utilize on a regular and ongoing basis that get blanket purchase orders. But again, that happens after the budget's approved and we move into January.
Okay, thank you. And Renee, if I could, I just wanted to add for the board's information, since this process is new for most. And thank you for giving the explanation on the logistics that go on regarding the readings. But tonight I want to remind everybody, in the spreadsheet, Scott will have the spreadsheet open, and you'll be able to visually see if there are modifications made, or if we want to look at different things, you'll be able to see them up on the screen. And again, I had reached out to all of you. If you have any questions between now and when the readings are, which is tomorrow, just please let us know so that staff can be prepared for the readings for tomorrow. Makes it a much easier process for sure.
I will also add that this budget season, has been like no other because of COVID and some of the things. But I think from a fortunate perspective of the township is we have had many more challenging budgets in the past when we present a budget where we don't have the cash carryover or don't have a positive unappropriated reserve at the end. Those are challenging budgets and probably take much more work to figure out if there's not a positive unappropriated reserve, then as a board, you need to make a difficult decision of do we raise taxes, don't we raise taxes to cover these expenses, or raise rates on services we provide. We've been fortunate this year to be able to present budgets. Our staff did a phenomenal job of looking at expenses and ways to cut expenses, so we didn't have to, in a challenging year, look at taxes. So, while it seems a bit easier, quite honestly, from a staff perspective, it is a bit easier because we've been able to stay on the positive side of unappropriated reserves, and be able to present that budget. Because again, this staff has done a tremendous amount of work in the background on those expenses that they experience on a daily basis. So that's, on other years when there have been years that we can't get to positive unappropriated reserves in the funds. And then, there have to make challenging and difficult decisions. But this year, we have been able, the staff has worked hard to do that. And so I think we're pretty proud of the product that was put in front of you from a fiscal responsibility and a fiscal steward perspective.
Great.
So Scott, if you are ready to proceed on with fire.
All right. We will start with fire, and Chris Kiskaravich, I would just like to first say that he helped a lot with his budget. He and I went over all of the expenses, and we looked at that rigorously, and we looked at the plan that we have, the fire apparatus plan as well. And so in large part, he had much to do with this as well. So, credit, if there's credit, that'll go to him, not me. So, yeah, so with that being said, let me just share my screen real quick so that we can all see the fire budget and then talk about it. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
we
good.
can screen, Scott.
Perfect. So the first thing I'll highlight, I'm just gonna hit the highlights of the budget. There's not a ton of changes from last year to this year in terms of expenses or even revenue, but there are some changes, and I want to just highlight those a little bit, and I think some of them warrant some discussion. So the first one, you'll notice the biggest revenue piece, that's our fire tax revenue. I'm gonna scroll down to the bottom of the page real quick and just show us where I derived that number from. We have our assessed taxable property value and our millage rate right there. And so our budgeted revenue for the current year for 2021 is going to be $1,122,752 based on the current information that we have. So that's our biggest revenue piece. And that's the fire tax that we had set in place several years back. And so that's the main funding mechanism of the fire fund. So that's it's about a $17,000 difference from last year to this year. We got a little bit of revenue from delinquent fire tax as well, but it's not much. And same with we also get some revenue from like alarms going off, but it's not much to speak of in terms of the main driver for revenue. So that's what we need to know. I think our budgeted total revenue number is going to be $1,110,297 here. And then moving into the expense.
Can I just say something about the revenues?
Yep.
The revenues are, and we always err on the side of conservative when we budget the revenues to not overshoot our revenues. So while that is our current assessed value, that doesn't include any additional assessed value. So we would expect a bit of a higher revenue on that based on property that could come online in 2021. But that's always difficult to project. And if there's any exemptions in that property and that type of thing. So again, we do this based on the assessed value that we absolutely know now.
The revenue for the fire fund is pretty straightforward in that regard. When it comes to expenses, I'll let Renee talk of the wages because that's one of the main drivers.
Wages, So this year you see an increase in the wages. That's because we did move a portion of our fire marshal was into a 50-50 split over to the general fund. Effective January 1st, his responsibilities will be changing to be focused 100% on fire. One of the things, and Chris can talk about this in greater detail in a little bit, but the fire companies have asked for a fire inspection program in the township. So looking to prepare for that kind of fire inspection program. And obviously that'll be coming before the board sometime soon. But again, the fire marshal turning to a more proactive approach in the fire inspection arena. So that will be the difference in the wages. And again, with that comes the other items that we talked about consistently throughout the other funds in terms of, health insurance, FICA, that type of thing. And I will say too here, workers' comp insurance, we provide workers' comp insurance to all the volunteer fire companies. So that's why you see the larger amount of workers' comp here. It's $55,000. They do not, they do not fall into our other workers' comp. Their workers' comps comes through SWIFT, the state, so.
I was going to mention, yeah, the workers' comp definitely covers more than just the 2 employees we have in that fund. So I kept expenses mainly the same. Chris and I looked at them year over year, and the fire companies have done a really good job controlling costs this year in terms of administrative and other smaller budget line items. And so we opted to keep those items the same from year to year. Chris, do you have any remarks on this? Anything I'm forgetting?
No, I think, like I said, like as we were looking at them, I would agree. They seem to stay pretty consistent, and it looks like we're gonna hold at that. And I'm not foreseeing any large increases needed.
One of the big, one thing of note that will be a big impact to the budget for next year is the incentive program expense. As you can see here, I'm budgeting for a $50,000 increase. This is based off of the last quarter I have that we gave out in terms of incentives for the fire department, which came in around $50,000. So my estimate based on 1 quarter of that expenses is going to be $200,000 for the year for that expense. So that's one of the bigger differences from last year's budget to next year's budget.
We are projecting your year-to-date 930 there does not include their 3rd quarter pays. They're at about $100,000 right now on their incentive programs.
When it comes to
we're going to just have to keep and we talked about this because when we did the last incentive payout and we had a big discussion, we're certainly, this is a great program. We want to continue to be able to provide it, but we're going to have to keep a close eye on the projected numbers of that and the ability to, we can't automatically assume we can always raise that percentage every year. We're going to have to kind of really monitor that. So, Chris, we're going to certainly look to you and Scott to kind of project a little bit to the future. So as the questions start to get raised throughout the year, if there's an opportunity to increase that incentive, we may or may not have it depending on the ability to keep within our range on the fund as a whole. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and as far as the members go, there's probably still room for them to work on certifications and get increases because they're not all at the top rate already anyway. So there's opportunity for them through training and just through years on the department to continue to move up. It's just the top end people that are topped out.
Okay.
The other big item we usually see in the fire fund is the contingency capital account. And I'll let Chris talk about the projects that we're putting forward from requests from the fire companies. As you can see, here they are. Here's the breakdown. Chris, would you care to?
Can you move that up just a little bit more?
Yep, for sure. Is that better?
Perfect, thank you. Yes,
good.
right now, when I touch base with each of the fire companies on what they're looking for capital for next year, Citronia just wanted to keep they had a plan for the shower room this year also, which didn't come to fruition. They wanted to make sure that we again budgeted for the shower room remodel at Citronia. They asked for 40,000 on that. Greener Walls is looking at a replacement of the heat pump air conditioning unit at 7,000, and also they wanted to look at the possibility of building a bunk room area for 43,000. And then the only thing currently came up from Woodlawn at this moment is to finish off on all their security stuff and install some cameras to finish off that security and alarm system. And they were also, and also was on a phone program as far as forwarding calls to the specific officers actually directly to their cell phones. I do know Woodlawn had touched base with Greenewalls on that, and they had a conversation on that. Matt Polonis, Dr. Polonis from Woodlawn has been doing a lot of their tech work, and I know they had gotten a lot of that information over to Greenewalls, and they were very interested in a lot of it. So I believe that some of that phone advancements are going to take care of both departments, is what I'm gathering from the guys and the work they're doing on that plan. That's all we have for the look for capital. We've also talked about some other ideas, and I want to get a long range plan with them. I figured after this budget season, I'll start working with each of the departments on their long range plans of where we're going to go with some of these also. That acceptable enough there, Scott?
Yes, thank you for those explanations. So that's historically the contingency capital part has been the biggest part of the operating budget. And so we were able to bring that down, which helps offset, an increase as you can see above. When it comes to individual fire departments and their individual expenses, so some expenses are shared by all of the departments all at once, kind of in a shared pot. And then there's these smaller little sections that each fire department has money with which they can spend. And so they've done pretty good, as you can see, where the actual amounts are for some of these numbers for the whole year. For all three departments, they've done well in those and have been able to do a good job in controlling those costs. So I don't foresee, based on discussions I've had with Chris and info he's gotten from the departments, I don't think we need to raise these expenses, budget-wise in any manner. But I certainly don't want to lower them as they currently stand. So that's why we split those things out, because certain departments have certain needs that are different and unique to them. And so that's why, we don't share all of them in the same area. As you can see, this total operating budget will put us with 1,110,297 in revenue. And then below you can see the total amount of expenses is 1,106,997 budgeted expenses. Our actuals, so that leaves us with a net, a projected net gain of $3,300 for the year of 2021. Currently this year, as of 9/30, the amount of expenses that we've had is $574,000, as you can see there at the bottom of the total expense line in the actual 9/30 year-to-date area. That's the total expenses. So that's left us with a cash carryover, and this is where this is where some explaining from my end will need to occur for the cash projection for the apparatus fund. So back in 2019, the BOC approved the process of replacing engine 3212, which is the total cost of which is about $600,000. So this was in line with our plan that we have for total, like the total fire equipment plan, which is like a comprehensive view of the various different needs of equipment that the fire departments will have to have replaced in current, in future years. And so I'm going to just flip over to the cash projection for the apparatus fund so that we can all be on the same page here for this. So our bank account as of September 30th for the apparatus plan shows $519,000 in it. And so between now and the end of the year, we will need to make a payment of $313,919 toward that new engine. We will also need to pay the other half of that. So that's only the first half. We'll also need to pay the other half of that in 2021 upon delivery. Because these engines, Chris, what was the timeline you told me on these?
The timeline they gave us is 400 days out.
400 days. So it takes,
Correct.
that's more than a year. Yeah, it takes a while
Yes.
for these to come in. So, in order for us to get the departments the needs that they have, we have to spend some of the money up front to get that to where we need to get it. So also in this area, I have it looks like we'll have enough from the operating account in the amount of $275,000 to bring that estimated balance of cash at the end of this year back up after we've depleted a little bit of it, about more than half of it, to back up to $480,000. I'll just show you that. I'll flip over to the cash projection for the operating. We have expenses that are estimated at about $200,000 for operating expenses for the rest of the year, which we have a couple different projects that we still have to pay for each of the departments, which includes some construction costs that they're currently undergoing. And we also have the incentive program to another payout for that. So I think we'll have about $346,000 left over from that. And then each year, so this is our proposal is to have the $275,000 that we talked about on the cash projection for the apparatus portion, to transfer $275,000 from the operating fund back into the apparatus fund. And then each year, we also have a fire fiscal stability fund that we have sought in the last few years since the inception of the fire fund to fund with $50,000 a year. And so this is our fiscal stability fund right now, and we have $50,000 in that. We're proposing that we make a transfer for the budget for 2021 as well. So we've already have one. We haven't made it yet, but we have one for 2020, and this will be what's reflected at the end of 2020.
Does anybody have any questions on that?
It leads for a very tight operating for, carryover for into 2021.
Yeah, I think where I would be concerned is that, with a $3,300 net operating, income, that doesn't leave much room for future apparatus transfers. So it seems like what we had done in prior years was to transfer money out of whatever was left over of the cash carryover during the year. And I don't know if that's normal. I just, it is, I guess it is what it is. But I would just be wondering to the extent to which we would need to evaluate whether or not to push off some of these projects that we have in the not projects, but push out a few years the future equipment purchases, or look into getting used equipment versus new equipment. And there's even some discussion as to the fire tax. So I mean, those are the options that you as the board have. And so
Yeah, and I'll say this, the fire fund, the fire tax, we had a very, when the fire tax was implemented, how many years ago now? I don't even remember. 2 years?
This is the third year.
So that is the source of the money coming into this fund. And we explained as a group, there's going to be a very delicate balance of operating expenses, which are pretty much consistent. But for those capital expenses outside of the apparatus fund, and Chris, you'll play a huge role in this, and you're starting to see, how this very sensitive balance has got to remain in place. So as they come up with capital expenses and projects that they're going to do, we always have to keep in mind, if they want to keep building up their apparatus fund, we've got to keep that balance in there. There's only one pot of money. It's not coming from anywhere else. So it's the fire tax money. So, I mean, it can be done. It's just a constant, monitoring of what needs to be done, what has to be done, and where we're going to save money as far as putting into that apparatus fund or putting off some capital projects, or even from the apparatus side. So that apparatus schedule that was put together, a few years ago, I know, Chris, you have one, and you guys have been looking at it. Certainly that's going to need to be reevaluated year after year, depending on, use and financial situations and all sorts of things. So, it's a moving target. It's going to be very fluid, but, it's tight, but it's doable for sure.
So I have a couple of questions. Thank you, Scott and Troy, for the backup. So with limited education around this, I'm aware of that apparatus forecast, and we just made the major purchase this year.
Mhm.
If we were to pull out that forecast and not go into detail, but like, when would the next major equipment purchase be? According to that schedule, is it like imminent, or is it a few years out?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. It's somewhat imminent. It's in 2022.
Okay.
And that estimated purchase is about $600,000 as well, 615.
But Mike, I will tell you this, just to keep in the back of your mind. Certainly, with Chris being new to our team, one of the things that he's going to tackle is revisiting that apparatus plan, because, like I just said, it's fluid. It's going to be constantly changing. We're going to, certainly he's going to look into, do we have an opportunity to push that out a year or shift a certain piece of equipment or whatever. He's going to work with the fire chiefs and the teams to find out the best plan moving forward. So, I say that because I know you're probably looking at the apparatus plan as it stands today, but remember, that's a very fluid document, and there could be changes to that could put us in a better fiscal path forward. Depending on what Chris comes up with the teams.
Okay, that's good. That's fair. And I have one other question, and I raised this for a positive reason. So last year at the budget workshop, when we reviewed the fire fund, there was a lot of discussion on how we were going to be able to move forward with the purchase of the apparatus that we did this year, recognizing certain cash flow constraints. One of the factors was this unexpected deficit, and comments were made by then Commissioners Bond and Block that we're just going to have to manage our way through it, and there's either via the apparatus fund or the fiscal stability fund to put monies in those funds to, like, year to year deal with the issue that was presented. So my question is, I don't want to go into details. Just generally speaking, do we feel that where we are now is beyond the issues created by that unexpected deficit, or is it something we're still managing through?
I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, Mike. What I can perhaps recall, but that would have been 2 years ago. I think that I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about. Was it when the prior finance person, when there was a miscalculation with revenue?
Yeah, as best I recall. I think you're right.
That was the
occurred
2019
years ago.
budget. That was the 2019 budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I agree with you. So it's something that occurred previously, but when we reviewed the budget last year, I mean, it was quite a, productive but long, involved discussion on how we would recover from that situation, that being for the 2020 budget. And all I'm asking now is, for this budget 2021, do we feel we've moved on past that problem, or is it something we're still managing?
Well, I think we've passed on beyond the problem, because this budget is reflective of the assessed value of the properties, not including the exemptions. So, I'm not sure. I think, quite honestly, we're in a better spot because we do know that we're going to take on a more property value, assessed value throughout 21. So, reflective in the 2021 budget is the assessed value of properties that are taxable. And so keep in mind, like I said at the beginning, we didn't budget for any additional assessed value coming on. So I would say this is a conservative budget from a revenue perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, what goes in our favor? What's in our favor for the budget here? As you can see, our net operating, our projected net operating income for the year is such that the fire departments have been able to control costs such that, the apparatus fund can actually have a transfer money can transfer into the apparatus fund. I would say, we're probably not, we wouldn't be beyond that question if if on this page, if this 275 amount was zero, that would be, I would, but given that we've been able to control costs, and given that it looks like we're going to be able to make a sizable transfer, it doesn't give me, it's not something I'll lose sleep over.
Okay, so thank you. We don't need to refer to that past history anymore in the future.
No. No, that was 2 budgets ago.
Yep.
I had a couple of questions on the transfer for the budget apparatus. Last year, looks like we were transferring 265, and so we upped it this year. Is that because of higher bids for the apparatus, or how did that number change?
Well, that's a proposed recommendation every year based on the cash at the end. So looking at the cash position and knowing that we're spending money out of the apparatus fund to the tune of, what is it, 630 or 626 or I forget, was it 313 or 318? 636.
Yeah.
Again, knowing that we have to fund the other half of that next year, if we can fund it out of an apparatus plan rather than taking away from operating expenses, they'd have to cut their expenses. So as long as we're in the financial position to be able to make that transfer, that's what's being recommended.
It's just, the only difference will be, in the future, like when we look at the fire equipment plan, like the master one, that's like Tori was saying, is very fluid. We can put some projects on a later time horizon than necessarily the next year. So even when I mentioned the fact that the next engine that's supposed to come up on the schedule is being at 2022, if at the end of next year, when we look at the budget and say, oh, what if we spent all of the money we had? Okay, well, then we just move that back, a year or two until we get to a point where we're, making more contributions into the apparatus fund. But it is important to know that the contributions that we do make into the apparatus fund come out of whatever's left over from the expenses that aren't expended, in the current year. So like the only fear I have, I guess, would be that the fire department spend every dime that's budgeted here, and then they find themselves in a position where they can't get another engine because they've spent all the money. That's the main fear I have. That's it.
I think it's important to mention too, Diane, just for history, it's very important, like Scott had mentioned, if there is money left over and the ability is to save it, to put it in that apparatus fund, because let's remember that the most important, besides the people are the most important thing for our fire department, of course, but the next most important thing for us to operate are those vehicles. If we don't have the vehicles that we need, and if we don't have the money saved for them, if there's a problem with one, if one, accidentally gets ruined, I don't know, I don't know how that works. We need to be prepared and have money saved up in that fund for them to be able to purchase or get a new one. So I have to just emphasize that it's very important, and from that balance standpoint, for us to make sure that enough money is put away in that apparatus fund and building up, so that we are in a good position as times move forward to purchase vehicles as needed. And I emphasize as needed. It might not necessarily be on the current plan that we have in front of us. It could change depending on the needs.
Correct, thank you. I wasn't arguing the need for it. I was just curious to the change, just understanding the procedure. And
Well, I
then
didn't think you were arguing. I just wanted to share with you a little history. That's it.
I appreciate that. My other, I guess, more general question. So the fire tax was enacted to help with the operating and capital expenses. And now we're adding another personnel, another wage to this, which obviously adds other costs for, FICA and taxes. So since, is that something that as a board we should discuss, if administrative personnel should be in a different category, maybe and under an administrative budget in the township, so that this would be dedicated to operational? And then secondly, if I understood you right, you said the fire marshal was going to potentially start some inspection programs. At that point, if the revenue from a program like that were to offset that salary, that would make sense if it was a net set, zero effect on the budget. Just something that I'm questioning.
Well, those revenues could come in because they'd be fire inspections. So those revenues could come into that fund. But I also, an allowable expense is any personnel and their benefits who are in any act of fire suppression are eligible under this fund. So again, I think it has been the mindset of the past boards that this is the appropriate fund to put those dollars into. So again, that's the pleasure of the board, but again, those are all expenses that are related to the fire fund.
I'll jump in there too, Renee, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the intention was with the fire tax, it wasn't designated just for operating and capital and the apparatus. It was for all things related to fire, and that included personnel. So I believe Chris's salary and benefits come out of this fund as well. So if there is a plan to start a program, which was requested by the fire chiefs, that's going to be related directly to fire, that too should come out of this fund. That would only make sense.
And is that an inspection program slated to start in the 2021 budget year? Do we know?
Yes, I've been talking with Tom Harper, working on the ordinances, and I've met with some folks from Salisbury and Upper Mac to see how they're running their programs. And I am looking at that program as that program's inspections get billed and whatnot, that comes in. My hopes is that when we had that program up and running completely in 21, that is going to offset those salaries, that we can start to take more salary reimbursement out of that type of program and make that that salary money available back into the operating budget or the capital budget.
Yeah, this is a program that the fire chiefs have asked for. And now we're at the point where we have personnel available to do that with some other internal changes. And so this program, is to inspect commercial properties in the municipality who have multiple alarms, sometimes multiple alarms in a day. And so again, it's an education process, but also to assist with potentially unsafe conditions in public buildings.
And I opted not to put, we don't know in terms of what kind of revenue that will bring in. So I wanted to be really conservative in terms of I'm beating my drum of conservative revenue, but in terms of this penalties, fire tax revenue line item, that's where it would go. And so we're all set up here to have that. I just didn't want to necessarily throw an estimate out there that, I have no clue about.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. What is the attendance incentive?
That's our staff is eligible for an attendance incentive.
Oh, yeah. This
Based on-
one,
That's
this one-
different than
sorry.
firemen. This is for
Right.
the sick time on our staff. So again, our fire personnel are not union personnel, so they're eligible for this incentive.
You'll notice also the change that occurred in the attendance incentive that, like for future budgets, like that should stay the same because that properly reflects where we are with our staff here. And then in the general fund budgets as well, you'll notice all of those attendance incentives went up. And I think we talked about, the reason being derived from the sick leave change into, our current attendance incentive program.
Right.
Thank you.
So that's one,
I
like,
have-
I don't expect that one to be different for next year's budget.
You do not expect,
The attendance incentive amount won't go up. That's a projected amount. They're actually a little bit more, but we don't, while it would be ideal, because then we wouldn't have sick time, but we don't project 100% of everybody getting the 100% of the sick incentive. So it's, 24 hours is one cutoff and 0 hours is another cutoff utilized in a year. So that was a program that we had switched to the end of 2019. Well, it was for the 2020 budget. Staff used to be eligible for 13 weeks of sick leave a year. That wasn't short-term disability, that was sick days. So everybody got 90 sick days of pay a year. We eliminated that benefit and increased the intended incentive for them not calling out sick, but left a little room in the event they are sick, not to encourage them to come to work sick. It's a program we put in place with the police in 2019 because they had a sick, very high utilization of sick pay. We went from spending over $150,000 a year in sick pay to spending $7 million. So it has significantly decreased our sick utilization.
thank you.
I just wanted to try and find out maybe what is the mechanics of this fire inspections that you are referring to? What are you going to inspect?
As far as inspections, the inspections that we'll be doing, that John will be doing, will be like the standard alarm inspections. He'll still do sprinkler inspections, but
Where?
there's
Where?
in all commercial buildings we're looking at.
Only
We're also looking at the hotels, motels need to be inspected. I know we have an awful lot of automatic fire alarms that take place at those businesses, restaurant inspections, commercials. And then also we were looking at some point, looking at the daycare programs that are around. There's a lot of daycares and there's a lot of requirements that daycares also have on them. That's kind of where we're starting the inspection program and looking at it from there.
So right now they don't have any supervision of any kind, or?
Right now, if there's no annual inspection going on for the businesses, basically once they get their certificate of occupancy, they're off and running and they're doing their thing and that's it. as to, and I know a lot of the other townships have all seen that as a problem. That's why they interjected and created the inspection programs to cut down on, and a lot of it was to cut down on the automatic fire alarms or repetitive calls that are to the same location for the same problem, and people not fixing the incident, which therefore puts more apparatus on the street, creates higher risk, and also has our folks responding to calls they really shouldn't need to go to.
Definitely need it, yeah. So this is going to be basically an annual inspection for commercial properties primarily.
Yeah, that's one of the big ones, will be annual inspections on the commercial properties.
Yeah, I just want to say I strongly support this, Chris, your efforts and everybody else's efforts around this. Everything Renee said and Chris said, you can go to any of the fire chiefs and they would say exactly the same thing and give you the exact same reasoning. So I applaud you for moving forward with this.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any further questions on the fire fund budget for 2021?
It's good.
All
Okay.
right,
I'm sorry, sorry. On the estimated cash in bank sheet, the fire operating page,
Yes.
it says that for operating expenses estimated for South Whitehall at 200,000. What does that include?
That was a general estimate of, I took the total amount of expenses, that $1 million that we had, or this 1.145 million, and divided by 12 and kind of multiplied that by 3 for 3 months of expenses, and came around ballpark 200,000. I like to have the bigger ticket items there listed underneath, because sometimes while operating expenses average out throughout the year, sometimes there's certain months of the year that we make bigger purchases. And so the incentive program and the construction costs that are in there in the capital fund, that capital portion, I want to make sure those are reflected and those are highlighted. So that's how I came up with that estimate. It's an estimate. I think it's I'm probably being a little harsh on the work paper. I don't think it'll come to 200,000. But that's where we're at with it. I wanted to be more conservative with expenses as well and estimate higher than where we're at. I don't foresee it being up to 200,000, but I just wanted to make sure that we have what we need to have here. And then at the end of the year, hopefully we'll see a bigger balance in the bank than what's presented.
yeah, our goal on these are just estimates and projected cash based on looking at expenses throughout the year or other things that we know that have occurred at the end of the year. We could have a fire truck come in and need a major repair to the tune of $70,000, $80,000. So we are always going to estimate high or on the conservative side, because again, these are just estimates and cash projections. They're not, they're not definitive. This is absolutely going to happen. So we always find ourselves to be on the side of conservative on the estimates to make sure that we don't ever have a cash issue.
Well, I appreciate that. Certainly taking a conservative approach. The reason that it caught my eye is I had looked at last year's, I had attended that workshop as well, and our operating cost for that last year was only at 35,000. So it was quite a jump from that. And I was just curious, was there something else that we were purchasing or, that put that number up that great amount?
No, we did a matter of based on expenses, so of the whole budget.
The way I calculated it was based on like a 12-month estimate. The budget numbers that were in last year's, I took some time to look into those, and it seemed like they were being calculated based on the 9 months of total actual expenses to be paid. So, or the 9 months that were the actuals. So when I looked at that, especially given the year that we didn't really spend a ton of money in all, across all budgets, we tried to do our best with COVID to not spend money. I didn't think that would be the most accurate one, and so I opted for the 12 months of expenses, trying to be a little more fluid there with that. So that's more of the rationale behind it.
And at the end of the day, if we don't spend the $200,000, then there's a higher cash estimated balance at the end of the year.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question. So when the end of the year gets here and these numbers become actual numbers and not projections, so we could be looking at a different bottom line and changes here. And will we, as a board, get those corrected numbers?
Well, you'll get your 12/31 financials, but we don't correct the budget, these estimates. We don't correct these at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Again, this is the assets. It's not an expense line. So, you know, as Scott explained the other day, again, if we had to change a budget expense item to a significant different number, then you do a budget amendment. But in this situation, this is an asset. It's a cash bank account. So again, our goal is if we end up with more at the end of the year, then we end up with more. But we don't know that. I mean, quite honestly, we pay December bills into January. So again, there's timing issues to that and all.
Very good, thank you.
So I am hoping
And-
that like
and
next
I
year's
also,
budget.
and I will also say one more thing. We always prefer to go with higher cash into the new year too, because again, our revenue really doesn't come into the township until taxes start being collected. So the township doesn't see an uptick in any revenues coming in until usually April or May.
Great.
All right, Scott, do you want to jump to general fund now?
Yep, I think we'll talk about. I emailed everybody the various letters for contributions. I sent those out this morning. So I think now is a good time to discuss the general fund and the executive contributions. And I kept these numbers the same from the meeting prior. You know, I haven't changed them just because, you know, we haven't had the discussion yet, but I'll enter them in as you as the board discuss.
So I'll just kind of start things off. Scott, you know, I went through and I looked through all the letters that we received. Some were thank yous and some were requests in addition to thank yous for the past donations. So, you know, I'll start with, we'll just start from the top of the list. So treatment trends, do we have money in for them or no?
We did not give money to the, or wait,
Okay.
we did, yeah,
Okay.
right here.
They didn't even ask for money, so, okay, so, all right, that's fine. We'll go to Citronia Senior Citizens Club. They did request on August 14th for a 2021 contribution, and they used that contribution towards their rental payments. I believe they asked for $750. They have been very diligent every year requesting this same amount. I don't think it's changed from year to year that I can remember. Renee, unless you remember a different number, but I really don't. They are a local group and have been active. I certainly don't see a problem with continuing with that contribution for them unless the board has another feeling on the subject matter.
Sorry,
Anybody?
you're on Clifford Seniors right now?
I'm
Sorry.
on Citronia Seniors. Citronia Citizens.
I know we had talked at our last meeting about whether reaching out to these groups to see if they even had any expenses this year because of COVID. I'm sure a lot of them didn't meet. I mean, do we have any idea if?
I did reach out to them and I was not able to she did not call me back. It was the Citronia Seniors that she did not call me back. The other seniors, I believe, indicated in their letter that while they hadn't been meeting, I believe they're assisting with food needs to other seniors. I believe that was
Clifford
it?
Park.
I think it was Clifford Park seniors.
Yeah, that said they had frozen dinners.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
We do have a high, we certainly do have a high percentage of older people in our community. I've always found that, supporting those different types of groups and clubs, especially since they did come to us in a timely manner requesting the contribution, we've always been helpful in that standpoint. So, but certainly it's at the pleasure of the board. From years gone by, we've never had an issue or a concern with the functions of these two groups have been. So for a $750 donation, it certainly made sense, but I'll defer to the rest of the board. I know Renee did try and reach out to them, but didn't hear back from, like she
Well,
said.
I certainly do support the seniors as well. I was surprised that the Meals on Wheels letter that we got said that they only serve 23 seniors in the township. That was a lot lower than I thought it would be. So I don't know if we have a way as a township to, reach out to them, maybe a newsletter to alert our seniors that there is assistance there with a couple meals a day if they're interested. Just an observation I made.
Well, I think Meals on Wheels is a very strong campaign program. Certainly we can talk to them, but we can focus on Meals on Wheels here for a second. That is an organization that the township has supported for many, many years with a very positive response there, and a much needed group of people that goes out and delivers these meals and meets with these elderly people on a some of them on a daily basis. So, certainly that's something I think is much needed and should be maintained.
I will say in years past, we haven't for the probably the last 5 to 7 years, but we had a very active staff who would help deliver the meals for Meals on Wheels. And I think we increased this contribution a bit when we stopped. Some of the staff were getting uncomfortable with it. And I mean, it was always volunteer, but then they started to kind of drop off. And so I believe that we may have contributed a little more when our staff stopped volunteering too. But for
Correct.
years, we were
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just for years, we had staff volunteering during the workday to deliver the meals. They rotated.
I think that's wonderful. I hope you didn't misunderstand my point. I was surprised that Meals on Wheels only reaches out. It said in their newsletter, their letter to us that they serve 23 residents in the township. I said I was just surprised that it wasn't more. It is a great organization. I do support them.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, you would think it would be a higher number of people. Now, what could have happened, Diane, is that number, I would imagine, fluctuates pretty dramatically throughout the year. So, I don't know the answer to that. There could be times when it's way high. It could be double that amount. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but certainly, we could reach out to. I actually know some people there. I could ask what their marketing is and how they reach out to the residents. And if there is something we can do and at least provide information on our website so that people know, although the elderly aren't necessarily looking at our website, it might be some other means of putting the information out there, whether it be in the Parkland Press or whether it be in the newsletter might be a fantastic way to kind of put that information out there, that is something that they can take advantage of those services. So Randy or Mike Cookitz, maybe we could make sure and add something into our next newsletter or reach out to Meals on Wheels and see if they want to put a little something in there, just something to think about for sure.
Right, that's why I suggested our newsletter. I know a lot of elderly people like to read, magazines when they get delivered to their home. And I would say the same thing about all of these senior organizations that we are considering donating to, that as a township, since we're donating, I think that it would be wise for us, maybe in our newsletter, to take a page and dedicate it, to let the citizens that are seniors let them be made aware of the opportunities that are out there to assist them in that manner.
Yep, I think it's yeah, that's why I too said the newsletter might be a great outlet for that. For sure.
I made a note for it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, I have no problem donating to the, the seniors that are on this list and the Meals on Wheels.
So, okay, so assuming nobody has any other questions about the seniors group, so we had Citronia Senior Citizens Group at 750. We had Meals on Wheels at 6,000. We had Clifford Park Senior Citizens, I believe, at 750. Then you have Lehigh Valley Active Life. Is that the same as Lehigh County Seniors? Yeah, it must be. Is that the same thing, Scott?
I believe
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yes, that one's the Lehigh
Always
County
get-
Senior.
I always
Okay.
get confused with this one.
Yeah, so
The
that they put in their
CLV.
request on 928. Yep. And they did the same thing for 750. Did
We
we?
did not receive requests from the Parkland Elementary Wrestling Club or the Pocono Wildlife. Now, Parkland Wrestling, I'm not quite sure that I don't think that they could possibly be meeting right now during COVID.
They might not have used their money from this year, which, I would assume could be carried into next year. So we haven't received anything from them. My question is Pocono Wildlife Rehab and Education Center. Glenn, did you, that's who we call upon if we have like a hurt animal or something in this, what that is?
Yeah, if it's something other than a dog or a cat, we reach out to them. They'll come and get injured animals. They've come on multiple occasions to get injured foxes is a big one that we get in the township. They've definitely come down for a couple of hawks, I believe, in the past. So they're definitely a good resource for us, and they come down very quickly to take care of any of the issues that we have.
I'll say that, thanks, Glenn. And I will say this to the rest of the board, just based on history. In the past, and I'm not sure if I don't think any of you were here when we would get this. We had quite a few calls for people who, had concerns on maybe a hurt, like Glenn had just said, a hurt fox or a wounded owl or a hawk. And it was very important to our residents that they were taken care of. So this agency, that's why I asked, is the agency that we can call upon to do that. A $300 donation to have the ability to reach them and also support what they're doing, I think makes perfect sense. But I wanted to give a little history as to where that came from. Any thoughts on that one from the group?
I guess my only is
I have a comment about all of these donations. They're all good.
They are all good. I will say this, let me just look here. Hold on one second. Book on wildlife. No, I don't think we had anything else from the letters that jumped out that was an issue, but does anybody have any particular concerns about the donations that are on the screen as we speak?
I just have a question about the wrestling club. Why are we supporting just that one? I know they have a multitude of clubs at the school. I mean, it just seems.
They have, Diane, it's so interesting. They have always asked specifically, and you know what? I give that Booster Club a whole lot of credit because they really do their homework and they reach out to everybody. We've been donating to them for many years. And because, it's obviously a great organization, anything for the kids, but they, the other groups have never reached out. They've never been considered because they've never requested. So and that's the best answer I can give you, unless Renee, you have more background, but that's truly it.
Say they ask every year, and again, that goes to a historic contribution that's been there for years.
Yeah.
And so, and again,
I give them credit because they truly do their homework. Whoever's running their booster club is a wise person. So You know, they've always been very diligent. Now I will say this year, like Renee mentioned, they did not put in a formal letter requesting the donation. This is just a carryover from a past donation. So that's something for the board to consider. We usually like to see any donation that we give come along with a request. Now, you know, the COVID is a new year for us. I mean, it put a lot of people in different situations. This might have fallen off their radar. You know, we don't have a letter from them this year. I'll just say that.
Yeah, and it's an elementary booster club. My guess, or elementary wrestling club, my guess is they might not be meeting now because they're not having a season.
Right.
So it may have fallen through the cracks from their perspective. So, I mean, if it's the board's pleasure, we can leave the $750. And if they come in later in the year and say, you know, if, you know, once they may be active again and they say, hey, you know, we just weren't meeting and it fell through the cracks. That's the pleasure of the board if you want to put that in or not.
I would, you know, on that same token, Renee, I would request that from, you know, even because all of these other places we have letters from, Pocono Wildlife Rehab and Education Center, I think we all agree it's very important, but I would definitely reach out to them. And first of all, we want to make sure that they're still active, because it would look awful silly if we gave a donation to a group that's not even active. And make sure that it's clear on what they do hasn't changed, just so we have something on file. Does the board agree with that concept?
I think that sounds good.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. So,
were there any letters that were received that aren't here?
no, I don't.
Okay.
Not that you sent, Scott.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I got them all.
I don't see any.
Well, we did get a letter from Turning Point of the Lehigh Valley, which is not on here.
Oh, yeah, you did.
Is that the one I'm thinking about?
That's
Yeah.
the Alan, one from Alan Jennings.
No, Lori Selinsky.
Turning Point LV. You're absolutely right. Yeah, they didn't specify any amount. That we received that letter on 4/13/2020. They did request a donation. Do you remember, Renee, Turning Point LV? Do they, or maybe Glenn, you're familiar? Do they support South Whitehall specific? Is that? I don't know a whole lot
It's
about that.
across the entire Lehigh Valley. They do a lot of great work with domestic violence victims through support as well as counseling. They work on helping to shelter them if that is the need, but they are a great organization. They do a lot of great work in the Lehigh Valley in entirety. And there's certainly people that would benefit from that in South Whitehall Township as well.
Awesome. That's really what I was looking for. So, yeah, good catch. Yeah, that's definitely one as well, that if the board feels so moved, it would make sense to make a contribution. They did put in a formal request. They did not request a certain amount.
Yeah, it did catch my eye because, you know, that they have a 24/7 hotline and they help with, you know, protection from abuse, that kind of thing. And, you know, with COVID, I certainly think that's something that we should discuss and potentially consider donating.
Tori, my firm does. We make a donation to them. In fact, I have a truck. My SUV is full of umbrella strollers, towels, sheets, gift cards to deliver to them. They have volunteers that appear at every PFA hearing to help walk domestic violence victims through the process, hold their hand, give them literature, you know, making sure that they have places to stay, places to go. So it's definitely a worthwhile cause, as Chief Dorney said, and they're always in need of assistance. So
Have we donated to them in the past?
No.
No.
We have not. But again,
it would make sense to me. And I'm just throwing out a number to get things started for the discussion. So Scott can possibly put in, you know, I'm assuming it's not the same, but you talk about treatment trends, on the same level, we give them a $1,500 contribution. Maybe we start there as a consideration number, learn a little bit more about the organization, see what they come back with next year, and then either reconsider more or less, but maybe look at a $1,500 contribution to be in line with the other ones.
I think that's quite appropriate.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I think the next thing we needed to talk about in the general fund were just a few, Scott, where did you put police laundry was not considered in the last go around. It was actually lumped in the admin that we took out that looked like was for PW. Well, PW was using, and some of that was going to police. So Scott, where did you add in the laundry cleaning for police?
I think that's in the police.
Yeah, we had a line in there that always had a zero balance ever since I started, and I know we were always considered in the
It was
one
being
general
charged to admin along with public works. No, that's clothing, Scott. There's a cleaning, uniform cleaning.
Uniform cleaning.
It may have actually been taken out when Brooke was here, because I think I asked her that question specifically, and she said it was all out of the one township-wide account. So she may have actually gotten rid of that.
All right, well then put it back up in admin, Scott.
Okay, we'll do that.
What is the amount? What is it? I lost you.
The cleaning of their uniforms to country cleaners.
This isn't to wash Chief Dorney's underwear? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I'll keep my mic muted on that one.
We did have 29 in there, but Public Works also had their own money budgeted. So when we took that out, we didn't consider the police. So Scott, I would take that to like 12.
Cool.
Not 20.
It's like $9,000 for the police.
Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, they have, yeah, all their uniforms get cleaned.
And what is the other three in that line item for? That's Public Works, you said?
No, Public Works is $17,000 for Cintas. The other three is just any miscellaneous. We have like, probably not this year, we haven't used it. We have those table skirts that if we use out at events, we have dry cleaned after use and that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
And then the only other change I had, we found a transcription issue in the general fund budget where it was at 13,000 instead of 31. And that was for the reimbursements for the water and the sewer fund for various different expenses. One of which being the IT expenses was the biggest one. That was the 31,000. But we also have like some for electric, some for there's like a water reimbursement right here for the water fund and the sewer for electric for water and sewer at 9,000, and then I think the rest is reflected in the admin portion.
The rest is reflected in the IT portion, Scott.
Okay. So we have the IT reimbursements 30,107, and then you'll notice right above you'll see a supply water reimbursement and a supply sewer reimbursement, and then a communications water and communications sewer. All of those are reflected in the water and sewer budgets at $53,000 or $52,200 on their budgets, so they all match. But that was the only other change that we made to the general fund.
And then I think your discussion tonight that you wanted to look at was the open space and 2 capital projects that were in Parks and Recreation.
Oh, before we get there, if I may, I wanted just to show the reflection. I added the grant for the police appropriately, the DUI grant. with the revenue and the expense side as well. And so our general fund should look like a remaining unappropriated reserve for next year at $500,000. So our overall budget changed a little bit, and it looks better than it did the last time we spoke. So that's like the bottom line of all of these changes.
That's the changes minus, again, if you wanted to have the conversation on the open space. Scott, if you want to jump to those capital projects.
So here's, yeah, the capital expenses.
Well,
This one.
Go ahead. I think Diane, you had questioned. I think you said E and F last week.
Yes. Well, in general, park improvement, park maintenance, but yes, questioning where the open space funds are reflected in the budget and how we utilize those to take care of projects.
Well, again, they're not reflected in the budget only. That would be, that is a bank account. So Scott, do you have the statement?
I do have, here's the listing of the open space funding as we have it. There's three main projects that we have open space funding coming in from. And then there's a few more. This was the 350,000 that you can see was a board approved transfer out previous to this meeting. And then we have also these projected amounts as well that we have in here that we think that.
Hey Scott, it's Randy. Can I jump
Hey,
in
Randy.
real quick? If you
Yeah,
don't
go
mind?
for it.
So this is not entirely accurate at this time. We've just recently received the 59,000 from Blue Barn Meadows, as well as another 10,000 for Blue Barn Estates. No, you want to highlight the outstanding contribution amount, Scott, the one just to the right. Yep, that was just received. So now all the monies have been received for that project. And then we've just received the other 10,000 for Blue Barn Estates, which you don't see on this list. So nearly 70,000 came in recently. We're looking like to be a little bit under budget with the playground project too. So I don't think we'll expend that full 350. And I would imagine Chapman's would likely be coming in next year as well.
So
You may want to
Randy,
check with Kristen Blahnik. I know she should be updating this here shortly.
Yeah, hers, yeah. She
Yep.
said she got the
This is the
statement.
latest one I could find too, though. So
so the $618,000 is not reflective of the 350 being spent on the.
correct. That's not been removed from that 618, right? So
Okay.
you would take that 618 plus the 70,000 and change I just mentioned, or a little less than 70,000 that I just mentioned, and that should be the balance that would be closest, I would say. That looks about right. Yep. Give or take. It's not to the penny, but we'll finalize this.
So I'll just and I mean we have possibilities here, but again I'll just emphasize that in past discussions and budget discussions and discussions with past boards, not saying that this has to stay this way, but the thought behind having a strong open space fund was to give us the ability to have that monies available should land become available that the township would want to purchase. Now, I will say this. Was it Kohler Ridge, Renee? Was it Kohler Ridge? Okay.
Yeah.
Kohler Ridge, we did purchase Kohler Ridge. That did not come out of open space. And that was unique because at that time, there was money available in the general fund based on what I forget what had recently happened. There was a insurance
reimbursement and that kind of stuff. So again, it put us in a cash position to be able to fund the purchase of land out of the general fund.
Correct. We won't always necessarily be in that situation, and we never know when land purchase opportunities will become available. So in past discussions with previous boards, it was very important. We could tell from the residents that we have the ability, should land become available, that made sense for purchase for the township, that we had a fund to be able to pull from, one that was a constant. That's where this has been building from. So, you know, we have to keep in mind, if we start tapping this out and then a piece of land becomes available and our general fund can't necessarily, account for us to be able to pull from it to purchase, and we don't have money in the open space fund, we're out of luck. We can't do anything. So that was the thinking behind this fund. If this board agrees with it, great. If they don't agree with it, we can take another route. But that truly was at the direction and the feeling, from and the feedback we were getting from the public on having some sort of ability to purchase property should it become available, to build this fund up so that we had some sort of an account to be able to do that.
Commissioner Morgan, to piggyback on that a little bit more, I believe when we purchased the Kohler Ridge property, we did not have the balance in open space to be able to pay for that in whole. And you can see here, we just received 491,000 from the Cracker Sport Road warehouse. So that's why you're seeing a bigger number than we have historically held. I think when I first got here, we were probably in the 20,000 range, and then it got bumped up, and then we were kind of hovering around 100, 200. So we've been trying to grow this account for that exact reason. And the other thing that I did find interesting in our open space plan that we did with North Whitehall a few years ago was there was a statistically valid survey that was sent to residents. And I think it is important to note that 80% of the 1,300 plus residents that responded to that survey actually were in favor of using local tax dollars to support recreation and open space development. So I found that a little interesting when I was reading that, and that's for none other than just to keep in the back of our minds here as we discuss parks and rec capital projects.
Yeah, and it's the stars aligned when we had the opportunity for Kohler Ridge. I think we were just in a they really did align for us to be able to get that property, and we were lucky. But we were trying to be fiscally responsible moving forward to put something together to put us in a good position should another piece of property that makes sense for this township to be able to purchase it, should the opportunity come up. So, I just say that. I know it, you look at this dollar amount and you're like, oh, okay, we should move all that money somewhere else and pay for this or pay for that. But then we take away our opportunity, which is truly what some of the residents were very vocal about, to have a fund to purchase land in the future. So I think we just have to weigh all those options before we make any decisions to shift money out of this one.
And one more thing, if I may. This is also another unique opportunity. Sometimes grants come up that require a 50-50 match, and those grants may not be matched in the current budget. So this is a fund that doesn't get transferred around. This stays in its own cash account, its own bank account. So if a grant does come up for Parks and Rec or land acquisition, whatever it may be, there is money here to match that grant right off the bat. It's not something that we would have to wait to budget for the subsequent year. So it is nice in that sense that, we could essentially apply for that grant and show that we have the committed match to it if the board decides to move forward with whatever grant application that may be.
Good point, Randy.
Well, I just want to clarify, I am not asking anybody to raid this account or do away with it. Certainly when we've got, just from an accounting perspective, $721,000 collected. I just think from a wise budget perspective, does it make sense to have this shown on our into our general fund as monies received, and then have line items showing monies transferred out so that at least it's accounted for in our budget? That would be my first observation with this great amount of money. And secondly, the purpose of the fees in lieu open space accounts, they are set up by the municipal planning code. Part of that is for maintaining and renovating parks also, not just the acquisition of land. I can appreciate the land question, but it serves the bigger question of how do we maintain all of these parks down the road. We've got the responsibility as the financial overseers of the township, obviously anything that we acquire or build certainly needs maintenance, just in an overall general sense. And I'm just asking these questions out loud to myself and for all of you to ask moving forward with obviously building a big park now that's going to need some maintenance as well. How do we, is there a possibility, as I said in the last meeting, to take a percentage of this fund, I don't even know a number, 10 or 20%, and dedicate it towards maintenance and upkeep of the current parks network that we have? I think it's just something that we should discuss.
When, Commissioner Kelly, when you say maintenance, do you mean like actual staff time for our Public Works Park employees, or mulch to freshen up the playgrounds, or what exactly you're referring
Yeah, I don't know
to?
how specific that the ordinance, I'm sorry, the MPC doesn't really specify, but maintenance meaning if the park needs like we want to upgrade Jacoby Park and it needs a facelift and new equipment, that type of, that, I don't mean necessarily cutting the grass, but certain playground needs part of its structure replaced because it's old, or, that sort of bigger ticket maintenance.
That's exactly what we did with the Cover Bridge Park playground. That was a larger expense, obviously, and we were able to do that because of the large contribution from the Cracker Sport Road warehouse. We have done that in the past too. That's not unusual, but with just this large expenditure coming out, staff felt it was necessary to try to build this account back up to a pretty fair level, which I think I like to see this account between 300,000 and 400,000 on an annual basis if we could, just for grant revenues or grant matches, land acquisition that may come up to support projects throughout the year. But we could go, again, it's to the pleasure of the board how you guys want to budget these projects. We're just we'd be grateful and happy to see them move forward if we can.
I really lean towards having that money available for special, like you said, Randy, special projects, grants, and land purchase opportunities. I know, I agree with you, Diane, you can use that money for that, but I think it's important to recognize the fact that, if we don't have a healthy balance in there, we're not going to be able to do special projects. And that's important.
Well, I agree, and I think that I guess, need to have maybe a study or to get a sense of where we are and where we're going, because when Kohler Ridge was purchased a couple of years ago, it was in the upper 300,000s of purchase just to buy the land. So, I mean, that's something that I think as a board, we have to decide how much of our budget moving forward will be spent for those sort of things and how much maintenance will be required for each project that comes online. I'm just looking down the road from a long-term planning perspective. What does this mean for us 10 years from now if we stay on this trajectory that we're on now? What does that mean impact to our budget more in a general sense? That's what I'm asking.
I think there's been a lot of planning and thought put into the parks that we have and the plans for the parks that we currently have. Kohler Ridge, and correct me if I'm wrong, Randy, that's going to be a passive park, which actually links right into a development. It made perfect sense as far as land there. So it's not like, the township or staff or anybody is just purchasing property willy-nilly and planning parks willy-nilly. There's a lot of thinking and planning that goes along with it. So I agree. I hesitate saying that we need to do some huge expensive study to see what kind of, I think Randy and Mike already talked about they're going to be looking at the master park plan here shortly, but an additional study to that, I mean, I'm not sure if that's money well spent, but that costs a lot of money itself. So I'm not, I think maybe it's because I have a little more faith in knowing that the plan that they have, for the park systems, the ones we do have, and any purchases of land that we've done, like for instance, Kohler Ridge, that was well thought out. That's all I'll say. I have a
comment that, well, I'm sorry. I have a comment that maybe we'll tie maybe everything together. So Commissioner Morgan, thank you for explaining the original thinking behind the open space plan and why it's valuable. I agree it's valuable and we should have it. The quick comment that, we need to see this as part of the budget and, budget review process. I think that goes without saying. Randy said, he'd like to see $300,000 to $400,000 annually. I think Randy's in the best position to call that shot, because he's got the experience. I'll make one last comment, and this is meant to be positive. So I said it, maybe one meeting or two meetings ago, and it came up at the last DOC meeting. I'd just like to see what is the South Whitehall Township Park Master Plan. And then when it came up at the last budget meeting, it was noted there's $50,000 to do a study that would be done, within the next year. I didn't say anything at that time. It's like, oh my goodness. I'd just like to sit down with Randy Cope and Mike Kukix and say, because Randy says, we've got our personal thoughts. I'd just like to know, what are your personal thoughts about the parks? Could we just have that conversation? Then when we review things like this, or when Kohler Ridge comes up, or the next Jordan Greenway design phase comes up, we just all know where it fits in. So I'll leave it at that. I would hope that we would be able to have that conversation someday. Otherwise, I support this.
Like I think that's a great idea. I think it doesn't require I know we have a study coming up, but we don't need to do an additional study. Maybe just down the road, maybe after budget is done in the new year, when things calm down a little bit, we have a simple presentation on where our parks are today and where we see them moving forward, and it'll give Randy and Renee and Mike and the team an opportunity to share their thoughts and plans that they've been working on for probably many years now, moving forward. So that sounds great.
I will
Yeah.
also say, Mike, I don't know because of COVID hitting, but typically, and I don't know if this occurred because of this year with it being your first year, traditionally there is a parks tour for commissioners in the spring of your first year,
Right.
where you go around to all the parks with us and we discuss kind of where we are with the parks. We didn't do that this year because of COVID. And so, maybe if we get out of the unfortunate spot that we're in today with more people testing positive, because I'm not sure, maybe you could go in individual cars, not driving together, but that's traditionally, we have done commissioners, two at a time, so that, but again, maybe if you drive in individual cars right now and not in the same car, but traditionally in the spring of your first year, there is a parks tour, and I don't believe you were able to do it.
Maybe a virtual tour would be
Yeah, maybe we can set something up as video.
Yep.
And
just
so-
a-
Well,
I
I
just
think
want to
dialogue.
I just want to say the same thing I said before, a slightly different way. So Randy Coe, he has a family legacy on Parks and Recs. He's got a college education on Parks and Recs. He's the most knowledgeable and experienced person in charge of our Parks and Recs. He's passionate about Parks and Recs. I'd just like to know what's in his head and where we are and where we're heading on a just quick
That's what
person.
really happens on a parks tour, Mike. That's what I just said. That's what usually a parks tour does. And so unfortunately, you didn't have that opportunity because of COVID this past spring. So, again, maybe come January or maybe March, when things are a bit safer, then you can get out on the parks tour. And Randy, and again, Mike is equally capable of discussing the parks and
I agree. All right, thank you.
And if that can't happen sooner than later, we can consider a virtual tour or a group discussion. That would probably be helpful. But good points. Thank you, Mike.
I'd be happy to provide that tour. I'm on a 2-week quarantine, but after the 2 weeks, and I want to wait till the weather warms up in the spring, like Renee said, I'd be happy to do that.
Awesome.
I'd like to make a note also, if I may, on the accounting piece of things for escrow accounts. Escrow accounts don't come in. I know there's been some questions on, where the revenue is and where the expense portion of these are. Escrow accounts don't come into the township general fund because this technically is not our money. So the money is held in escrow. So the township doesn't have, it's not really something we have budgeted for. So like we have other monies that we have for other construction projects and other things that we keep in escrow as well, that we don't reflect on our general fund, and that's not necessarily the most appropriate place to put them. We do have a spreadsheet that does show what the escrow funds are. It just doesn't come in on the budget as like a revenue and expense line item.
So let's come back to the thank you, Scott. Let's come back to the question or comment at hand and maybe get some other input. I mean, Diane shared her thoughts. I shared mine. Mike, I'm not sure if you shared all yours, but Matt and Joe will give you guys a chance to kind of chime in here on the shifting of any of the or designation of any of the or percentage move of any of the money from the open space. So Matt, maybe we'll start with you. I see your mic is on, and then we'll hit Joe.
Yeah, so I mean, in my opinion, it wouldn't make sense to move money into maintenance that we don't know that we need. And if and when we get an opportunity to buy something, to use the money in this fund, at that time we can decide, all right, are we really going to use the full 720,000 because we might need to set some aside for maintenance or for other uses. So to me, it would make more sense to allocate the money that's in the fund if and when we need it, rather than put money aside now that we may never need. So in other words, basically, like if we get an opportunity to buy something for 720,000, well, we're going to have a conversation about whether it makes sense to use every penny in there or to set some aside for maintenance. But to set some aside for maintenance now that we don't know that we'll ever need seems like one extra step that's not really necessary.
Just to clarify, this all started with Jacoby Park, that we're renovating that park, and that's what made me even entertain the thought of using this for maintenance. When I talk about maintenance, that's what I was referring to. So I don't know if I was misunderstood or didn't speak clearly, but that was my point. We have $65,000 and then 80 for the vistas that could potentially come from a different fund and not from the open space fund, which is paid for by developers, as opposed to township taxpayer money.
I think this is just some feedback off of that 2009, where we did have 80% of our residents felt that their tax dollars should be contributed to the purchase of parks. It's just, again, this is a pleasure of the board, but I think too, we're in a position in the general fund this year to be able to fund these projects out of general fund and not have to tap into an open space reserve. So if we can pay for them out of active money, and leave the open space fund as it is, obviously if we couldn't have paid for it out of the general fund, I think it would have been a potential option out of open space, but we were fortunate this year that the general fund could support these projects. So that's just.
Joe, what are your thoughts, Joe Sutton?
My thoughts are very similar to Commissioner Mobilio. I feel very word by word almost. So that's.
So, Mike, what were your thoughts?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I already said I support the concept of the fund, and we should maintain it. I looked to Randy's advice on what is the the appropriate level. I mean, this amount's okay for me this year. If it should be brought down sometime in the future, closer to what Randy recommends, then I accept his advice.
All right. So I think it seems to be the consensus of the group, not that we're not voting or anything, but to keep the fund as it stands. Certainly point well taken, Diane. And certainly we can talk about that again in the future, but it looks like it's the consensus to keep it the way it is at this point.
Sounds good.
All right, what do we got next, Scott? What were the next set of questions?
Ooh.
I think that was it in general fund.
That was it in general fund. Yeah, the next one, I'm just gonna do is circle back to the water fund and the sewer fund and just show us the overall pages. And then Diane, you had a question on the water fund expenses for the cash projection, and I updated that a little bit as well. So I'll bring that one up first next, and then we'll talk. So the summary sheet, it didn't change too much, but it did change. So with the revisions that I did make based on the general fund, the operating transfers that go from general fund to the water fund, and with the cash carry forward, that was the big change, the only really big change here that did occur. Our estimated unappropriated reserve should be $1,142,000. On the cash projection page, Diane, you had brought to my attention that about the question about 2018 budgeted expenses, and I touched a little bit about this on the fire fund. So what I did here for my operating expenses and the payroll expenses was take the total budgeted amount for the year and divided that by 12 months. That 2018 amount was being calculated off of the 9 months of actual expenses, and then they estimated the remaining expenses in the budget for 3 months. So I once again went a little higher with my estimation based on the fact that I want to be more conservative with expenses, and also due to the fact that in our budgets our actual expense has been much lower than what we budgeted for in 2020. So I don't want to undershoot expenses, although I don't foresee, from now until the end of December that we're going to have a major shift in these numbers other than in the positive.
And I think, Diane, your example of the 2018, the problem with that method of doing that was that one of the large expenses and pension expenses was not factored into that number. So when you factor the actual cyclical things into that, Scott took a different approach to his projection, which makes sense. So again, that's to estimate. Again, we're always conservative on the estimates, but again, just a different method of doing it, utilizing a total year expense versus a 9 months without some of the higher expenses that we know that can sometimes come in the last 3 months.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
So that was pretty much everything for the water fund changes. So I'll bring up the sewer fund as well and show that amount. So this is the estimated unappropriated reserve that we'll have for that at around $3.5 million. And we talked about the need for this unappropriated reserve to be in this ballpark, due to having in the back of our mind things with Klein's Island and updates to our infrastructure and whatnot as they arise. So I did reflect a little bit of the cash carry forward here as well. And I tried to break, like I struggled with the methodology that I used to. So on this one, I saw our biggest expense for this one is the LCA billing. So I tried to break out expenses as much as I could with the sewer fund. So that's not consistent with what I did with the water fund, but that's just the way that I did it. So that's just the summary on the sewer. And so I updated the you'll see in the operating expense here, this $52,200 is the amount. That's the one that I highlighted from the general fund over to the water fund. The last question we had, I believe, I don't know if it's the last question, but we had a question about toters. And so we looked into that as to how many toters have been purchased and whatnot in the last few years. And so in 2019, what my staff has given me in terms of what we've looked at, it looks like we've sold 68 small toters and 470 large toters, and we've made about $21,000 in revenue from these items in the current year. What we've been billed for from advanced disposal for those are about $19,000 for that. So we're in the net by about $2,776 for that. And then our revenue for last year, for 2019, we brought in about $6,400 of revenue, and we expended about $8,500. And so the hard part about doing a calculation with toters is that we have inventory on hand that we had due to the fact that we purchased toters ourselves, and so some of these numbers can be carried forward from a year previous. It might be that we buy toters in October, say, and it lasts all the whole year and then some, and we don't have a year where we purchase toters. It's not like we have a set amount that we purchase every year. We do this on an as needed basis. But it looks like
we won't buy toters. We, as a township, don't necessarily purchase the toters now. That's part of our advanced disposal contract. And so once we get a request for the toter, Advanced delivers it, and then we bill, the resident pays for that toter. So so a little different this year than in prior years. This is the first year that Advanced has taken over the toters and the delivery of them. And just as an FYI notice, we did receive our official notice today. Waste Management and Advanced Disposal purchase has gone through. Advanced will become Waste Management. You'll still see Advanced trucks out, but they will start a transition over the next year. So as we find out additional information, Advanced will still be servicing our contract, and they're now a branch of Waste Management.
So to go back to the toters, Renee,
Yeah.
so yes, I remember last year when the refuse contracts the bids were open, that it was going to be through the hauler from now on. And so that's where we are now. But
Correct.
so we don't have any more toters, and we're not
No.
so ordering. Okay. So
No, we don't have any more toters.
we don't do that anymore. So I know that last May we, as a board, voted to put $50,000 into a fund to offset the fees for toters for some broken ones. So is that program is done since we don't buy the toters anymore anyway?
Yeah, well, we provided half-price toters to get people, again, we had a lot of resident complaints that their toters were old and they were being damaged with the arms. So the half price will not go beyond $12.31.
of this year.
Mhm.
Okay, so when we sell them for half price, then, okay, so at the end of this year, thank you.
Yeah, so then it just comes into a revenue.
Okay. Thank you.
So like in the last 2 years, that total amount that we've, like if we were to break out, like let's pretend toters stood on their own as like its own fund for a second, we would over the course of the last 2 years be in the black $650.
Okay, so we pretty much broke even.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, are there any other questions?
I just had a general question, just because I'm curious. I remember George Kinney, when he was talking about they were circulating an updated fee schedule. So I'm assuming that we're going to have some changes to our fees. Just as a general understanding when you're predicting the budget numbers, if we don't know what those new fees are yet. I mean, are we building in to assume we're going to have more revenue for the things that CD is asking for fee schedule increases for, or did we stick with this year's numbers and it'll just be in addition to the budget?
Correct. Correct. We, again, conservative side is that again, the fee schedule is not passed until the beginning of the year. So we budget at the fees at what they are. That's why the fee schedule comes in January.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a note I'll write down to look at for next year's budget to properly reflect the updated fee schedule at that point.
Great, thank you.
All right, Tori, I think we're done.
All right, everybody's good with questions? All right,
Thank you everyone so much for working through the budget workshop meetings. I know these get long, and I just want to say thank you as this was my first year of going through the entirety of it, and the staff has been absolutely wonderful here at the township. I have asked way too many questions, and people have been far too gracious to me. So I just want to say thank you to the entire Southwell Health staff and the department heads and everybody working. So you've been wonderful.
great job, Scott. You really stepped it up when we needed you. Thank you so much. We appreciate all you've done, and Renee, thank you for your leadership with the entire group and all of the executive team and staff in general. It's, you know, the budget it's not just about the couple of workshop meetings that we all sit on. It's quite a lengthy process for staff as they go through and start looking at this for many months prior to this. So much appreciated. Thank you for always keeping the fiscal responsibility in the back of your minds as you're working through the budget throughout the entire year and preparing for us. We appreciate that very, very much as commissioners. Much appreciated. I will open it up at this point. We have no new business or discussion items, but I will open it up for courtesy of the floor. If there's anybody on the call today who would like the opportunity for courtesy of the floor. All right, we have no executive session planned, so I would need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
We have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Kelly. Can I hear a second, please?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Mobilio. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody, for all your hard work. Well done.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night, everyone.